Whether on the field, on the court, or on the balance beam, there's more to winning than the final score. Hi, I'm Patrick Manning of Black Desert Resort. We recognize the effort it takes to succeed. That's why we are proud to partner with the Utah Checkdown, the podcast that tells you the story before the game, then gives you a recap of what happened when it's all over. The grit, the glory, and the disappointments. Join us for stories of Utah's finest athletes and coaches. Thanks for listening.
You're listening to the Utah Checkdown Podcast. And now your host, Josh Furlong.
Welcome back to another edition of the Utah Checkdown Podcast. I am Josh Furlong and happy to be with you today. Hopefully you had a good bye week, kind of got that reset. Maybe you didn't follow football this weekend. I don't know. Maybe you just kind of need a break. I don't know. Whatever works for you. It was a good weekend of college football. Obviously, the Ohio State-Penn State game was probably the climax of the weekend in terms of just two top 5 teams going at it. But there was a lot of craziness in college football, especially in the Big 12, where Iowa State suffers its first loss and Kansas State suffers its second loss, and obviously changes kind of a little bit the landscape of the Big 12. No, Utah's still not in the mix, but it changes, and I think it kind of shows what could have been available to Utah if things came together. But we'll talk about that. We'll talk about kind of what's going on right now on the beat, and we'll get into that. But first, let me tell you about our partners, Black Desert, who are helping with the KSL.com Beyond the Game video series. The videos highlight various athletes and give an inside look into their life. Recently, we talked with former Utah offensive lineman Garrett Bowles about how a second chance at life allowed him to pay it forward to troubled youth. You can check out that video and many others on KSL.com. Black Desert is a new resort destination in St. George that features a championship Tom Weiskopf 19-hole golf course that combines a private club feel with destination resort golf amid lava fields and 360-degree vistas. Black Desert is changing entertainment in southern Utah, and they're just beginning. Black Desert, where remarkable is within reach, home of the Black Desert Championship PGA Tour. All right, let's just jump into this. Today was the Kyle Whittingham press conference, and a lot of intriguing things taking place there. Obviously, coming off of a bye week and then going into the rivalry week with BYU, there's going to be some intriguing things. But the biggest thing here is quarterback, right? I feel like this podcast is essentially just turning into a 24/7 documentation of all the fun, we'll call it fun in quotation marks, of Utah and their quarterback battle. If you remember right, last weekend, going into the bye week, Kyle had said that they were going to split reps equally between Brandon Rose and Isaac Wilson. Isaac Wilson has obviously been the team's starter when Cam Rising hasn't been available, so that's kind of where it's been, but he got benched in the third quarter of the Houston game. Brandon Rose comes in. Honestly, didn't have a great stat line, but depending on how you look at it, looked composed in the pocket, but still didn't really get much production out there. 45 yards through that game-clinching interception at the end that allowed Houston to basically kick a field goal and win the game. Houston follows it up last week and gets a good win. So, this is a team that is on the upward trajectory, but I still think that Utah loss was on them, right? I think that was in for the taking. I tweeted kind of tongue-in-cheek on Saturday about the Houston game, and if that changed your perspective. I don't think it does. This wasn't a game where, it was close in terms of two teams battling it out against each other. This was mostly a Utah team doing everything it could to kind of hurt itself. And not to take away anything that Houston did, their defense was obviously pretty solid. Their offense is a much different team with Zion Chris in under center. He's still not the quarterback that you're expecting, but when he's a dynamic weapon as kind of a converted running back, that kind of changes things. So interesting to see how Houston's going, but once again, still not something that really changes your perspective on this, other than maybe you get a glimmer of hope that you lost to a team that is on the rise. But in this season, I don't know that really gives you anything, especially with how things have gone, and especially with how the defense has done its job essentially to help Utah win games. And if you could just put up just a moderate amount of points, you'd be okay. So going back to that QB debate, right? So going out of that game, you now have this quote-unquote QB controversy. Is Kyle going to pull a move where he switches to Brandon Rose, or is he going to stick with Isaac Wilson? Are you looking to the future, or are you trying to kind of win games now? And that's kind of what people have kind of put it on right now, right? Can you win games with Brandon Rose where you get a little bit more experience in terms of being in the system long enough and understanding what's going on? The reality is as I documented last week, Brandon Rose was beat out by Isaac Wilson. Now, depending on how you want to view that, was it Kyle trying to appease the new upstart 4-star QB and trying to keep those in-state inroads, going? It's up to debate. I think they honestly felt like he showed out better in fall camp and deserved to be number 2. At least that's what we heard. Kind of a side note, this is part of the reason why us as media get frustrated that we don't get to watch some elements of practice, right? We have to take it on face value, and we're left to whatever they tell us. And so outside of us talking to sources or other things, which, they're not always perfectly accurate, and there's not always a perfect source out there that's going to give you everything that you need. Outside of us not being able to see it, that's where we have to go. And so there's been a lot of speculation and a lot of different things going on related to this team, and the media has been left out of the loop. And I know every time I tweet about access for media, I get a bunch of fans pissed off at me for, saying cry me a river type stuff. The reality is this hurts you. This hurts you as a fan. This doesn't allow you to be able to understand what's going on in the program. This is what you're spending your hard-earned money on, especially if you're donating to NIL. You don't get that access, because we don't get that access, and that hurts the program. You can close off access, and you can do these things in the name of, secrecy and trying to get the competitive edge, but it's been proven that it doesn't necessarily change anything, right? Teams still have to go out there and perform. The reality is Utah isn't performing, and we don't know if this was a problem from the beginning, if this was something where they were struggling early on, and maybe we could have tempered expectations a bit. I still think this is not that case. I think this is a team that had the ability and everything to compete for a championship and absolutely go through this Big 12. But it's easy to sit here and say that knowing where it's been, right? This Utah team is 4-4. Things aren't going well. And so whatever happens on paper doesn't always translate onto the field. You can sit here and blame preseason projections. You can blame whomever you want, right? Blame me, whatever. I don't know. I don't really care. The reality is when you don't give us access, that makes it a challenge for us to do our job, which in an end, it essentially comes back to you, and you don't get the opportunity to see it or to hold people accountable. And I get it. People get really upset when it's like you're holding teams accountable. They're a public institution. Like, the reality is that's what it is. Kyle Whittingham is getting paid millions of dollars to coach, and he's been protected from us because all we can do is go off of what he says or what other people say. And if they're all touting the company line, they're not going to come out there and say that, oh, you know what, we suck this year. This is going to be awful. What coach is going to say that? You go into Big 12 media days, and every single coach there is going to talk about how, they've changed the things that they needed to change over the offseason. And nobody's buying into us. And I mean, BYU was saying that, right? BYU was saying nobody knows what's going on in our locker room, and yet they were picked 13th or 14th, whatever it was, to finish in the conference. Nobody knows. But that doesn't even mean that just because you were picked in that spot and nobody knows that suddenly it's going to translate to wins or losses. That's all on the field, right? You've got to take care of that. Unfortunately for Utah, they put all their eggs in Cam Rising's basket, and when that didn't work out, they suddenly, reverted back to some of the frustrations of last year, and that's where we're at. So, long story short, that's kind of the essence of not allowing us to have access and not allowing us to be able to really kind of see what's going on. And so this hurts. We don't know. Honestly, like I can sit here and say that if Brandon Rose were to be the starting quarterback, and I'm going to get into that in just a second, but if Brandon Rose were to be the starting quarterback, I don't know anything about what his ability is on the field, right? The only thing that I've seen is his spring game performances, and in my opinion, Isaac, did a much better job than him. Granted, these are much more vanilla defenses, but even saying that, Isaac still, in my opinion, did better. You have this last game where, he only threw for 45 yards and didn't really move the ball all that well. Yeah, he maybe looked a little bit more composed in the pocket. But that doesn't tell me anything, right? He could come out here and throw for 350 yards against BYU, and I wouldn't have a clue. Nobody does. Like, unless you've gotten a chance to see practice. But even then, what happens out on the practice field doesn't always translate onto the playing field, right? And so it becomes a challenge. We can sit here and debate who should be under center and all that. And, at the end of the day, it's the coaches that know, and they're the ones that have to be held accountable for it. So let's just jump right into it. Kyle Whittingham talked about kind of the QB situation, and you can only guess what his answer is, but I'm going to play it for you, and so let's give it a go. You had talked about last week, Brandon and Isaac were splitting. Have you made a determination?
Yeah, we've got a good plan right now, and we'll keep it to ourselves, obviously, but we have a plan going forward, and I guess nothing's ever set in stone, but we feel like we've got a situation that is best for us and gives us the best chance to win.
When you put in Brandon the last game, you said that you were looking for a spark.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering, was it something that he showed you that led to, hey, let's give him a shot maybe in practice, as opposed to, well, the other not working with the other one, so let's just try it.
Little of both. We weren't very productive offensively. Haven't been productively much this season since the first couple games, but it was a little of both, and just thought, and Brandon had been practicing extremely well as the number 2 guy, and just thought, given the circumstances, it made sense to give him a chance and see what he could do. So both things are correct.
So yes, you're back to a quarterback controversy. We're now 10 weeks into the season. Utah still doesn't really have a clear answer outside of Kyle saying that they feel like they have what they need to do to win the game on Saturday, right? Whatever that means is kind of up to your interpretation. I don't know that I could glean exactly what it's from that, but I would say it's probably trending towards Brandon Rose from what I've heard. He has had strong practices. My understanding is last week was one of his best. But once again, I don't know that foretells anything, right? You can have strong practices, but when you get on the field, especially against a BYU team that has been playing very well and connected on defense, all of that can go out the window if you get sped up. So, if Utah does decide to go with Brandon Rose, you have to hope that he is the guy, right? You have to hope that he can do what they need him to do and that they've found an offensive identity that fits his skill set. At the end of the day, this is really kind of the situation that Utah's in, where they haven't been able to adapt to their players, or at least in a way that changes what they do best. And so, it's been a challenge for them to just kind of keep, trying to do the same things that they feel like they need to do, while not really kind of scheming towards that. And so, if Brandon is the guy, and like I said, it's trending towards that way. I don't know that that's fully the case, but it is trending towards that. If he is the guy, if you're a Utah fan, you have to hope that he can get something done, right? You have to hope, because if not, what did you do? You now just benched Isaac Wilson, who is supposed to be the future of the program. I think everybody kind of expects that. And I'm going to play a clip from Kyle Whittingham about Isaac in just a second. But if you go away from Isaac, what more does that do for you, right? Can you go back and turn it to him? Yeah, you can. And I think maybe that might give him a little rallying cry in some respects, like, see, I got this type stuff. But at the end of the day, we talked about this, right? I've talked about this last week, and when I documented, the nature of a true freshman, kind of where they're at and kind of how this team is, this is a Utah team that they're trying to win now while also trying to project to the future. And maybe Brandon Rose is that guy, right? Maybe Brandon, if you can get him to win those games this year and then, or at least compete, right? It doesn't even have to be wins, but at least compete and give your guys a better taste in their mouth. You do that, and then, maybe he's your starter next year. That's great. Now you still have a proven, freshman quarterback that can maybe redshirt, learn from it. You can go to him if you need to. That would be all fine and dandy, right? Assuming that you don't get any transfers in or different things that way. But if it doesn't, now you're in a world of hurt in the sense that now you have to go back to Isaac Wilson and do that in a way where you already kind of showed him that you lost confidence. And Isaac is a supremely confident kid, but at the same time, it's not easy when you don't get a guy in rhythm, right? You don't get him, giving him his confidence. You've seen him completely change in demeanor in terms of his on-field play as the season has developed. When he was at the Utah State game, there was a few things he had to shake off the rust on, but that was like his first true start. He'd gotten his opportunity. Once he got into a rhythm and kind of got over those initial jitters of just, I'm now the starter, he started to develop, and he was making throws that, really kind of showed what his potential could be. And he continued to do some of that stuff. And Oklahoma State wasn't perfect, but he still did well. He didn't know he was starting that game because there was still the drama with Cam Rising and yada, yada, yada. But as the season has developed and things haven't worked and you hear all the criticism about the offense, it's real easy to put that on yourself, especially as an 18-year-old kid, right? And then when everything is going wrong, and then you get benched and there's not really a clear decision why other than just saying for a spark, that becomes a challenge. And like I said, there needs to be something where Isaac is held accountable for his play, right? You can't just expect to always play a quarterback that isn't performing. But at the same time, as has been documented many, many times, and I'm not going to go over to all of it, this isn't all on Isaac, right? The run game hasn't been effective. The offensive line hasn't been effective. Isaac hasn't been effective to some extent as well. So this is more than just him. But if you go away from that and Brandon Rose is not the answer, now I feel like that opens up a whole new can of worms, and we're back to another quarterback battle. And, this season, but for all intents and purposes, is lost. You're hoping that you can play for a bowl game. You're hoping that you can play to beat your rival. BYU is favored by, I believe it's now 4 points. We'll get into them. This isn't going to be a BYU podcast today. We'll review them and project them and all that other stuff on Thursday as we go over that. But this is the situation Utah's in right now, right? Like, it's not an easy situation. It's not something that you want to be in, and if you go out with Isaac, do you feel like you have the confidence in him to keep him in throughout the entire game, right? This is going to be an emotional game. Let's be honest. Like, you're going in there, you're going against your other older brothers. It's not just Zach. It's all three brothers. This is their team. And so what does that mean? Is he going to try to push more? Is he going to try to make a mistake? Are mistakes going to develop because he's trying to press a little bit? That becomes a challenge. And so regardless of how you go with this, you're kind of telling us what you want the rest of the season to be. And I'm not saying that Utah shouldn't try to win now, right? Because you do owe it to the players in that room that this is going to be their last year. You owe it to them to be able to give them tape so that they can develop and go on to the NFL or at least have their best chance at an NFL opportunity or wherever it may be, right? But that may not always be the answer in what you're trying to do. So there's that. Here's kind of what here is what Whittingham said about the Wilson situation and kind of their thoughts on who he is as a player.
Yeah, to kind of go back to the transfer portal, obviously with quarterbacks like the NFL, they're starting to become the highest paid position in college football. In terms of a roster building perspective and what you've seen from Isaac, has there been any pause, I guess, from what you've seen from his play to potentially view him as the future of this program moving forward? I know that's a very broad question, but just curious based off of your perspective.
Well, just generally speaking, we got a ton of belief in Isaac, and we think he's got a big upside. We didn't know he'd be thrust into the starting role a game and a half into the season. The idea and the plan was, hopefully Cam stays healthy, Isaac gets sporadic playing time along the way and continues to develop. It really takes over in spring as the number one guy. I mean, everything was accelerated so much, and it's almost I don't want to say it's unfair to Isaac because there are other true freshmen in the country that are thrust into starting roles, one reason or another. But the bottom line is we have a lot of belief in Isaac, and it'll be, important to see how the year finishes out. He's had nearly 400 snaps. I think he's had 397 snaps at quarterback so far this year, and that's far more than we anticipated him having. But silver lining is he's going to be that much further ahead in the future because of these snaps that he's had.
I'll just go out and say it. It has been unfair to Isaac Wilson, right? And I know that's not, that's the role that he was put in, right? He was named QB2, and so it's not unfair in that respect. But this is a tall task for him to be able to be put in where, you haven't really adapted the game plan to him and really haven't opened it up to help him and have just kind of let him be on his own in that respect. I know it's not quite that black and white, but at the same time, this has been a tough challenge for him, right? And so, like he said, we'll see how this develops in the future. I really do believe that they think that he is the future of this program, but now what does that mean? Like I said, let's say Brandon Rose gets the job on Saturday, and he goes out there and competes, right? Like, I don't know what that looks like. Are you trying to keep the game close? Do you win? Whatever that case may be, what is success for Brandon Rose? And obviously that's moving the ball. That's scoring points. Those things are kind of natural. But does suddenly everything change because Brandon Rose is under center? I don't know. And so let's say that Brandon goes out there and has whatever that measurable of success is in your mind or in the coach's minds, and he finishes out the season, 3 more games. What does that mean for Utah, right? If they make a bowl game, what does that mean? Okay, so Brandon Rose, is he going to come back? Does that kind of slow down the timeline of Isaac Wilson? Does that open up the transfer portal? And at the same time, I don't want to say that Utah shouldn't be worried about that, but you should, right? Because at the same time, you can't afford to continually not be able to develop or mature your quarterbacks, especially in your system. And there are programs that can do it, right? Like Oregon can seemingly throw in a quarterback. You get Dylan Gabriel this year, and suddenly everything just looks phenomenal, right? It's not always perfect, and they had their bumps against Idaho early on in the season, but now you're looking at them like this untouchable team. There are teams that can do that, the plug-and-play type guys, right? Utah is just not that destination for quarterbacks to plug and play. And so if you lose Isaac Wilson to the transfer portal, and I'm not saying that that's the case. I've got no indications that that's the case. I don't think there's any desire for Isaac to transfer, but we're still early, right? You've still got at least a month until those types of conversations are being had. But at the same time, you have to look at some of those things, right? And if you go into this and you're losing another quarterback and you have to go in and try to get more of these transfer guys, don't get me wrong, they're going to look for transfer quarterbacks. That's a thing that they're going to do. So you can already expect that. But you can't expect them to necessarily just jump right in and have success at Utah, especially at Utah. It's just a different system. Andy Ludwig is no longer here, but Kyle, as I've mentioned, is always going to restrain the offense a little bit, wants to keep things safe, doesn't really want to take his shots. Can you get a guy that can fit that exact mold and do exactly what you need him to do to get that trust that, a Cam Rising had? If you can get that, and Kyle Whittingham is still the head coach, that works great. What that looks like if Morgan Scalley's the head coach, I don't know. I know Morgan wants to open it up a little bit more, and he wants to have more of a modern type offense. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be this easy plug and play. There's a lot of schools around the country that try that, and it just doesn't always translate, right? You have to find your guy. You have to find somebody that can fit your offense, but you have to have that identity. And if you lose that identity, it doesn't really work for you. And unfortunately for Utah, they've lost their identity. They've always, under Kyle Whittingham, run first. You establish the run. You establish the physicality, and you win that way, right? It's always that. It's always been, you win the trenches, and you want to beat the team in that regard. You control the game by controlling the clock. You run the ball. You're doing everything to just manufacture the game that way. Going into this year, they were talking about more working on the outside, and I'm not saying that that was not part of their identity, because you do have to have that, right? You can still be the Kyle Whittingham-led offense with more of a passing attack, right? You can still get the ball to Dorian Singer, and you still get it to Carson Ryan and Brant Keithy and Landon King and all these other guys on the outside and still maintain your identity, right? You can still establish the run. You can still establish that physicality, but it becomes a challenge when you start taking a little bit of that away. And I feel like this coaching staff has kind of steered a little bit away from that. And fortunately, today we were able to ask Kyle about this, and he was pretty candid about it for the most part. I mean, he's not going to give the full root cause or the root answers to this, because, you know, that's never going to happen. But we got a lot of answers about kind of the identity of what this team is. And so I want to play that, because I think this is really telling about where Utah is in the state of college football and where they're at this year, because I think this is probably the bigger storyline to anything else that Utah has this year, whether it's quarterback play, you know, Isaac Wilson, offense in general. Like this, to me, the identity of this program is the biggest storyline. So let's jump into that.
I would agree that we're not as physical this year as we typically have been, and you really gauge that, at least we gauge it, by how you run the ball and how you defend the run. And we haven't been as good at that this year. Tough to pinpoint one exact reason for that. We haven't been our usual selves in that regard. And that has been our identity as well. And so they go hand in hand. And, the ability to run the ball and play action pass off of that's been our formula for success for a lot of years. And the ability on defense to turn teams one-dimensional by taking away the run and forcing them to throw has not surfaced this year either. So that's certainly been a big part of our issue this year.
Kyle, kind of going off the question that Justin asked about identity, is it harder in this NIL era to kind of stick to your identity, knowing that you kind of have to appease guys, or what's your approach on that?
Much harder, and it's. I think there's a lot of teams across the country that are feeling and going through similar situations. When you, 4, 5, 6 years ago, before the advent of the portal, whenever that was, you might replace 25 guys out of 125 on your team. Now you're replacing 45 plus, and the culture, I don't know if diluted is the right word, but it's, before you had 100 guys teaching 25 guys how we do our thing, and now it's almost a 50-50 split, the new guys as opposed to the guys that have been in the program. But it's not unique to us. It's across the country, and I think that's why you're seeing a lot of different results throughout the country, because it has had an effect, and it will continue to have an effect. And whoever handles it best, and it's almost coming down to a sheer talent thing. That sheer talent is, who's one in the country? Oregon. Who's number one in the country in NIL budget? Oregon. Who's number 2 and 3? Probably Georgia and Ohio. It's starting to fall right in line. If you remember, I said this a couple of years ago that things are going to start mirroring very soon. In the top 25, the NIL budgets, and to a certain extent, that's happening.
Kyle, in the vein of the portal and just how you build your program, obviously you've not had a lot of turnover in comparison to other programs in terms of the foundational pieces that you've had.
Well, we did have 45 new guys this year on the roster, so that's darn near half.
Given, I guess, the impacts of that, has it changed, I guess, the way you see your coaching philosophy and the way this year has gone? Has it changed the way that you might approach it in the future?
I think for certain. And, you got guys that come to the program and are here for a year or two and either leave, or you've got grad transfers that only had a year or two left. And so there's it's constantly in flux. And I don't want to say it's like you're hiring mercenaries every year, but it's a situation where, again, you got to collect as much talent as quickly as you can, and then hope it gels and comes together and you get results. And it is a different approach and different strategy than when you had guys just marinate in your program for 4 and 5, 6 years, and it is different. But again, they're not making excuses or complaining, because the entire country is going through the same thing. I just feel that maybe our culture and our the way we did things gave us an edge back, when that could be possible to have happen.
And Kyle's not wrong to that extent, right? Like, Utah always developed this family culture this culture of physicality, the culture of we're going to take, 2-3-star guys, whatever ranking they are, and we're going to go out and be physical and tough, and we're going to go win games, right? Or at least be in contention. You may not win every single game, but you're at least not going to generally get blown out. You're going to keep games close. You probably could win. There was this identity of this team that it didn't matter what ranking you were when you came into the system because you're part of our family is what they would say. And everybody bought in, and there was this collective belief that everything was going to be, great because players could be in the system for a few years. And there were transfers, right? Like before the full transfer portal, there were guys that would come in and out. Cam Rising came in before the transfer portal. So it's not like this is something that wasn't happening. Obviously, it is a much more exponential rate now where you can have full turnover in rosters. Colorado, they turn over almost every single position. But you've got guys, as he mentioned, that aren't fully, I don't want to say that they're not fully invested in the program or the culture. It's just not something that is as important to them, especially when you're only going to be there for a year, right? I'm using a guy like Dorian Singer, who is not the guy that's the problem, right? He's not a problem. He's the guy that's working hard. He's doing everything he needs to. He demands the ball, but he also works some of the hardest out there on the field. And so he's not the problem, but I'm using him as the example because of who he is, and that's the case. He comes into this program, it would be real easy for him to say, I'm this star receiver. I had all these suitors. I've played at USC. I've done all this stuff, and I demand the ball. And if I don't do that, that's tough luck on everybody else because that's me. He could come in there and not buy into that because at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. One season, it would be easy to just say, like, I'm in and I'm out. I don't really care about this family attitude. I'm just here to get paid because I have a quarterback that's going to get me the ball and I'm going to be able to showcase my talent, right? That's the thought because you had Cam Rising coming in and a lot of these wide receivers believed that they were going to have this veteran quarterback coming throwing to them, right? And so it's really easy to come in there and just say, I'm just here to be able to put up the stats, showcase my talent, and move on to the league. Once again, Dorian Singer's not that guy. He truly believes in the culture. He truly believes in that kind of stuff. But you can see how easily that is for another player who maybe doesn't have that same work ethic or doesn't have that same buy-in, where when things go south, when Cam Rising is out and you don't have that veteran quarterback, even, Brandon Rose has been in the program for 3 years, and if, even if he comes in, he's not experienced because he just hasn't got it. That's a completely different game plan. And so once things aren't working anymore, it's real easy for that culture to break down, where there becomes infighting in the program. And once again, I'm not reporting that this is happening. I know there's a lot of speculation on Twitter and everywhere that there's these internal fights and, everybody hates each other. Look, every single football team has frustration. To that extent, they're still a family. They're the ones going to battle with each other day in and day out. And so there are going to be frustrations. That's every team. Even on Utah's championship winning years, there's frustrations. They've had players-only meetings that year. They've had different things. So this isn't anything new. Now, you can believe everything that you want to on Twitter and believe that, I'm not going to get into it. I don't want to expound upon those things because I haven't heard that any of that is true outside of just the general team stuff. There's frustrations, right? The defense is frustrated at the offense. That happens, right? But this isn't necessarily anything new at Utah. Now, it's a little worse, but the defense has always been entrusted to be able to carry a team, and then when the offense is able to do their job, it obviously makes things better. So there's frustrations. But at the end of the day, there's a whole culture shift in this program, and that can apply to the coaching staff as well. If the coaching staff is just more worried about NIL and who am I going to lose and catering to players, there was a comment early on in the season where, Dorian Singer was getting a ton of the attention from the offense, right? I think Isaac Wilson, threw him the ball 14 times that game. It could have been even more. I can't even remember. It was a lot. There were other guys that were available, right? And we asked Kyle Whittingham about this after at a practice, and he says the best players are going to get the ball. But it was kind of, there was more behind that in the sense that, it comes down to culture. It comes down to you want to be able to develop the players that come in through NIL. You want to be able to do what you can. And so this becomes a collective team effort where if the coaching staff stops embracing their own identity and kind of chases the NIL situations, that becomes a problem. Now you have players, if they are just chasing the NIL opportunities and trying to get their own stats, that becomes a problem. And slowly that culture deteriorates inside of a program. Once again, I'm not saying that this is where Utah's at and suddenly they're doomed and there's no culture here and nobody believes in the family mindset and mentality. I think they do, right? But I don't think that that can be the calling card that Utah has anymore, especially when things go wrong, right? In the past, it was, our backs are against the wall. You got that chip on our shoulder. We're the underdog mentality, and we're going to go out there and prove the world. Now Utah has the expectations. They come out there. They're expected to run the Big 12. That was the understanding that everybody had. Fans expected that. The team expected that. You were kind of untouchable with Cam Rising. The problem is you had Cam Rising, and that was it in terms of the mindset, right? The reason why Utah was projected so high when you were coming into a new conference, knowing that Kansas State was supposed to be good, Oklahoma State was supposed to be good, Iowa State was supposed to be good, Arizona, there was a bunch of teams that were supposed to be good, but the reason Utah got picked to be the favorite is because of Cam Rising and the complementary set of players, right? But that's the reason. And Utah bought into that reason, and they continued to go into that reason. And so when things didn't work out, it changed. And so suddenly this culture that you've had of physicality and of family, everything kind of changed in that mindset where it became much more of a challenge for you to be able to kind of hang on. And so now when there's a bunch of cracks in that armor and Utah's offense has just been abysmal, it's real easy to start pointing fingers. It's really easy to sit here and say, no, this is a coaching problem. It's really easy to sit here and say, no, this is a quarterback problem. No, it's the offensive problem. No, it's the run game problem. No, it's the offensive line problem. It's really easy for every single one of those position groups or coaches to point fingers, right? Coaches can sit there and say, players need to play. We've practiced. We've taught them the right things. They need to do it. Okay. Players can sit there and say, the coaches need to set us up in a better position. Okay. All of those things are true. And you would be 100% right. And that's why you're getting this situation where nobody has this clear answer. At least nobody's willing to give a set clear answer, not even Kyle Whittingham. And it's because it's all a problem, right? It's all kind of showing up. And so all of these little things and all these little factions are coming in. At the end of the day, this is still a team that the ones that want to be there, they're going to continue to fight. And you're going to see more and more of that as the season develops, especially if Utah keeps losing. Who wants to be there? Mekhi Bernard wants to be there. Dorian Singer wants to be there. You have those types of guys that want to be in there and get in that mix. There's more guys than that. I'm just pointing those two out. They want to be able to be in there for whatever reason. I don't know what their motivation is. I know they love football. Obviously, Dorian Singer, for example, has a bright future in the NFL, and he's trying to do the best that he can to get there. Mekhi Bernard is continually trying to show that, he can be the every down back, that he can be this guy that can be relied on and be a guy to lead a team in the run game. But all of those things have to complement each other. They all have to buy in. They all have to believe in this, and they have to maintain that identity. Right now, it doesn't feel like Utah has any identity in terms of what they're trying to do. You can say that they're trying to establish the run or they're trying to become more physical. The reality is they're doing none of that. Maybe on the defensive side, they're being a little bit more physical and they're trying to be able to maintain that and they're doing a good job, but there's no set identity on this offensive side of the ball. And that becomes a big challenge for a team that is trying to do that while also maintaining some level of success. It doesn't matter that the true freshman quarterback was out there. It does in the sense that, it makes it much more of a challenge. But at the end of the day, it's more about the process and more about how you've developed that identity than anything. That culture. And as much as Kyle Whittingham, I believe it. Like Kyle Whittingham says, we had much more of an edge that way when we were able to do it the way that we wanted to, right? NIL has changed that. But in the same vein, you've got to adapt with the times. And for the most part, Kyle Whittingham has done a great job of adapting. He did well to be able to make sure that NIL funds were available. They were able to keep players, whether it be Cam or Brant, or you're bringing in a Dorian Singer or any of these other players that you can come in. They've done well to adapt to the times of in terms of just being able to rally a fan base, rally donor base, and be able to compete in the world of NIL. Is it still the level of Oregon or Ohio State? Absolutely not, right? But it's at least at a competitive enough level that you could win the Big 12, right? There's no doubt that Utah could have won the Big 12. The problem is a lot of the other stuff that goes into that is they're not adapting to what they need to do. The coaching staff, you look at Andy Ludwig, for example. Andy Ludwig, his offense isn't the problem in terms of his scheming, right? He knows what to do. He's got a great mindset. He's the type of guy that is playing chess while everybody else is playing checkers. He can see things. He can project things. The problem is it took so long for players to understand his offense that it became a challenge. You can't necessarily bring in a majority of these players through the transfer portal, especially ones that only have 1 year, and expect them to suddenly be inserted into that unit. As much as these guys compete on a day in and day out basis and they're working hard, there's still levels to that, right? The Dorian Singers, the same as like a Jalen Johnson or a Clark Phillips III, those guys put in incredible amounts of time. They still did the bare minimum for what they had to for Utah football, which is already at a high level. And then they took it to the next level to be able to be better. And you're seeing that projected them into the NFL where they've done a phenomenal job. And they did a phenomenal job at Utah. There's going to be a select few amount of those players that are going to do beyond what is necessary at Utah. And so to be able to come in there, you have to be able to adapt to the offense. You have to be able to adapt to the defense. You've got to be able to help these players in a way that it helps them adapt to a modern style offense. And I know that that's really challenging for an offensive coordinator who's been in the game for a long time, maybe doesn't like the way that the current structure is. I don't know. Andy never talked about that kind of stuff. But at the same time, you're seeing that you have to be able to help these guys. Do you think Dylan Gabriel came up to Oregon and they're just like, nope, this is what we're going to do? And if you don't figure, like, Dylan is probably a different style of player, and that's what they're recruiting for, and they're trying to get the guys that can immediately plug and play. But at the same time, they're doing things to help him. They're finding his skill set and seeing how it can be tailored to their style of offense. Right now, Utah was all in on Cam Rising. That's it. And I get, like, most teams that's going to be a challenge if you lose your starting quarterback. If Oregon had lost Dylan Gabriel at some point in the season, things change, right? Like, I get that. But there becomes a challenge where if you're not able to change that identity and you're not able to, or not change the identity, but keep the identity of your program, but change your, the adaptation of how you do it, that becomes the problem. And so this is where Utah's at. Can that be corrected? 100%, right? Mike Bajakian can come in here and he can absolutely do things to help scheme things better. You already put in Jalen Glover in the game, and he was able to showcase some of his talent. Maybe if you can get he and Mekhi Bernard and maybe some other guys working, maybe you can start establishing more of that run game. And then it doesn't really matter who is back there at quarterback. It does, but you know what I'm saying. You can get in there and you can establish that physicality again. You can get in there and establish the run. And then it doesn't matter who your opponent is. Utah has the talent to beat BYU. Now, that we'll debate this on Thursday and kind of see what it takes. But they have the talent. It's just a matter of being able to put all these pieces together to be able to compete in unison to be able to make it done. Right now, there's a lot of, I don't want to call it self-interest, but there's a lot of players that have their own interest of trying to get to where they need to. Mekhi Bernard talked about that after the Houston game. We have to have a culture of wanting to win. And until Utah can get there, they're going to face these similar situations. And when we come back next Monday and we talk about how Utah did against BYU, it's going to be either more of the same stuff where Utah just completely was terrible and we can continue to point fingers and we can continue to say, no, this is the reason, this guy's got to go, this guy's got to, there's a lot of that. Or you're turning the page and you're saying, okay, this is how Utah finally got it done, right? They may not win. They probably won't win. But at the same time, you can at least have progress, right? And I think that more than anything is where Utah needs to go. You don't have to beat BYU this weekend to be able to salvage your season. Yes, it's not going to be the season that you wanted. In a 7-3 season, let's say you win those last 3 games, wouldn't be great. But at least you salvaged it. You left on a positive note and everything worked out, right? You've got to show progress. And until they do that, this is all going to be the same. We can continue to have these podcasts and talk about the exact same thing. All right, I think that's about it with that, right? Like, I think we're done. We've talked about this so much, and I appreciate you guys continually listening to this because I feel like we continue to cycle through the same things, but at the same time, there are different nuances to this, right? There's different things going on. hopefully we'll get to learn more about how this goes. We'll see, what happens in a rivalry game, which is completely, chaotic and even in years where one team is 100% better than other and the other team is terrible, it's never predictable. So it's easy to say that these two teams are on different trajectories, and they 100% are, but that doesn't mean that will foretell how this game goes. One problem for Utah is they did lose Money Parks to the season. He suffered a collarbone injury that's going to keep him out. That's a big loss to that offense. When it is clicking, he becomes an easy downfield threat that absolutely spreads the game. For an offense that hasn't really taken a lot of shots, that changes it, right? And so that hurts Utah. They need to be able to have that, but they'll figure it out. They've got the assets there. It's just a matter of being able to compete and being able to do that. So that's it for the football side of things. Today, Monday, the basketball season did start. We'll try to sprinkle some basketball stuff in here from time to time. The women, I just came back from the women's game where they beat SUU 105-52. They look good. Their offense is clicking. I think they have a much more flowing offense, and I don't know that we learn a ton from Southern Utah, a team that is clearly inferior to what type of team Utah can be. But at the same respect, I think this Utah team is being, I don't want to call it disrespect, but I think they're being kind of, they're not looked at as highly in the Big 12 right now just based on losing Alyssa Peely. But I think they have the talent to be as good, if not better, just based on kind of how they're able to share the ball. You've got Jenna Johnson, Maye Torre down in the post that can do some really phenomenal things, and you continue to have a bunch of sharpshooters on the outside. And defensively, outside of a few mental lapses or times where, especially the secondary unit comes into the game as the starters are sitting, there were some lapses. But I think this is a complete team. I think they have shown potential to be able to do well on both sides of the ball. And really kind of be at that upper echelon style team again. So obviously the Sweet 16 and beyond is their goal. They're 1-0 on the season, still a long ways to go, but you got to like what this team can do. You obviously get Gianna Neepkins back after her knee injury last year, so that's a big thing for them. She scored 18 points today and did a great job there. So curious to see how that team goes. I think that's a team that if you haven't, after all this time, if you haven't had a chance to check them out, they're a fun team. You got to go check them out. Their tickets aren't as much as the men's, although the men's aren't that much either. So go check them out. It's a fun experience. I promise you'll enjoy the game of basketball watching the women play. So you've got them. And then the men's basketball team opens up their season tonight against Alcorn State at 7 p.m. Curious to kind of see how they develop, how they kind of come together as a team. They have potential. I'll say that. I think in little respects, this team continues to improve in different areas, right? But they have to keep reinventing that in some respects because the transfer portal hasn't been kind to them. And so now you're putting yourself in a very, very difficult Big 12 conference that is obviously considered one of the best in the country, if not the best. And so how Utah performs will be, interesting. Obviously, a lot of these early season games, these non-conference slate games aren't going to tell us a ton, but at least you can kind of get an idea of what this team can look like, what they're going to do. So we'll have that. We can recap some of those types of things, as I said, as we develop some basketball in here. But this still remains a football podcast for the time being, and we'll talk about that. But we'll come back on Thursday and have a discussion about BYU, kind of seeing how that game develops, see what Utah can do, and we'll kind of go from there. So with that, we'll sign out, and we'll talk to you again later.